Congratulations. If you're watching this, you've survived both Liberation Day and Black Monday. But is the tariff panic behind us? And who's winning the debate? The tariff haters or the tariff champions? As I film this, it is Tuesday, April 8th, and the market had an up and down day. After blasting to an early gain of 4.1%, which would have marked its best day in years, the S&P 500 quickly lost all of it. However, some great news in this Forbes article. Nearly 70 countries have reached out about reaching deals on tariffs. I've listened to a ton of commentary over the past few days, and there are people I respect on both sides of this issue. Personal take, it's too soon to tell, but I'm leaning towards optimism. What is most surprising to me is that some of that optimism was inspired by a very unlikely source, one of our most notorious swamp creatures, Nancy Pelosi. Now, you may have seen this viral video of a 1996 Nancy slamming Chinese tariffs and the resulting trade deficit.
In terms of tariffs, I think it's interesting to note that the average U.S. MFN tariff on Chinese goods coming into the United States is 2%, whereas the average Chinese MFN tariff on U.S. goods going into China is 35%. Is that reciprocal?
29 years later,
in a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal. That means they do it to us and we do it to them.
Pretty wild to watch that back to back. Shout out to my buddy for bringing that Pelosi clip to my attention. However, once you get past the incredible hypocrisy, given the Democratic Party's current position, she actually presents some very valuable insight.
And this brings us to the point that others have said, well, we can't isolate China. Do you think for 1 minute that with 10 million jobs at least and $35 billion and be over $40 billion this year in a trade surplus, all those billions of dollars in surplus, that the Chinese are going to walk away? Where are they going to take 35 to 40% of their exports?
Now hold that thought. I've also been very encouraged by commentary from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Here he is making a very similar point to the one just made by Pelosi.
And if countries retaliate, which some have said that they would, some have said they wanted to wait and see, what is the White House's response going to be to those countries?
Well, Caitlin, one of the messages that I'd like to get out tonight is everybody sit back, take a deep breath. Don't immediately retaliate. Let's see where this goes, because if you retaliate, that's how we get escalation.
And then it becomes a full-fledged trade war, in your view?
Not a trade war, depends on the country. But remember that the history of trade is we are the deficit country. The deficit country has an advantage. They are the surplus countries. The surplus countries traditionally always lose any kind of a trade escalation. So I did, as a student of economic history or a professor of economic history, I advise against it.
What is the point they're both making? Well, Pelosi is speaking specifically about China, where Bessent is speaking about any country with which we have a trade deficit. But the point is the same. The trade surplus country has more to lose in a trade war than the trade deficit country. And we are the trade deficit country. Look at that chart back from 1995.
China trade supports 170,000 jobs in the United States, 170,000 jobs, whereas our imports from China support 10 million jobs at least.
China was supporting 10 million jobs with their exports to the United States. We were supporting 170,000 jobs with our exports to China. So who would have suffered the greatest impact in a trade war? Pretty obvious. So it seems we have some leverage, and the numbers are much more lopsided today. You know, I was a Bessent skeptic when I heard he once worked for George Soros. To me, Soros is one of the most destructive forces in America. That being said, Scott Bessent is definitely winning me over. He comes across as intelligent, confident, and above all else, sincere. If his intentions aren't good, he's doing one heck of a job disguising it. Here he describes who stands to benefit from this administration's tariff and tax strategy.
So, if we are thinking about a 10% global tariff, and let's assume that we we import about $3 trillion a year. So that's 300 billion, and that's a substantial revenue raiser that could then be used for working Americans on no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime, and for those buying autos, they can reduce their bills because interest on American-made cars will be tax deductible. So this is really a working class, the tariff and tax plan.
My final takeaway after comparing that Pelosi clip to recent comments from Bessent and Trump is this. Members from both political parties historically agree on the necessity of balanced or reciprocal tariffs when they're speaking on behalf of the American working class. So when someone is shitting on tariffs, whether they realize it or not, they're basically acting against the interests of the American working class. In the long run, I believe that'll be a gut punch to the country and would ultimately hurt the average American's financial situation far more than this current market dip. Welcome back to Shadow Wreckardz. I'm Scott, and this is independent media for the people. For those of you interested in my fishing exploits, and I know there aren't many of you, I will give you an update on my quest to catch a trout a little later on. I'm not promising much, but there is a little action. I would not let you hang around for nothing. But first, let's continue with our discussion. One of the major mainstream media themes I've noticed, in fact, I've seen it echoed by many in the alternative media space as well, is that the percentage calculations are either a lie or simply a drastic miscalculation. I've seen terms like insane math. I'm not sure why, because Trump made it very clear in his Liberation Day speech what all was included in that calculation.
For decades, the United States slashed our trade barriers on other countries, while those nations placed massive tariffs on our products and created outrageous non-monetary barriers to decimate our industries. And in many cases, the non-monetary barriers were worse than the monetary ones. They manipulated their currencies, subsidized their exports, stole our intellectual property, imposed exorbitant VAT taxes to disadvantage our products.
Now, I know Trump can be a bit hyperbolic, so let's allow a more measured Scott Bessent to bolster our confidence in those numbers.
And I can see some of the countries disputing some of these reciprocal tariffs, saying that's not actually what we charge. What would your response to that be?
Well, I can tell you USTR has the volumes of data, and they've been doing it a long time. So, and all this will probably be challenged in court. And I think that USTR in Trump's first administration won over 4,000 lawsuits. So I think the data is very robust.
So you expect that if there are any legal challenges that the administration would be successful on that front?
I think the data is very robust, and it's going to be difficult to challenge.
Difficult to challenge. Now, I believe the mainstream media just wants to portray the Trump administration as a bunch of bullies, but they have the receipts.
It's all detailed in a very big report by the U.S. Trade Representative on Foreign Trade Barriers. It's a special book. It's very, frankly, it's very upsetting when you read it, when you see what people have been doing to us for 30 years.
Now, I don't want to inundate you with repetitive information, but I'm going to allow Trump to one more time explain what goes into that calculation.
For nations that treat us badly, we will calculate the combined rate of all their tariffs, non-monetary barriers, and other forms of cheating. And because we are being very kind, we're kind people, but we will charge them approximately half of what they are and have been charging us.
Hopefully that dispels the rhetoric that these percentages aren't legit. But why would the mainstream media play dumb? What could they have to gain from the previously asymmetrical trade barriers? Perhaps Nancy can shed some light on that as well.
Tail sections of the Boeing 737s were mostly made in Wichita, Kansas. Now they are made in Shen province, where workers make $50 a month.
Remember, all of the mainstream media is owned by multinational corporations. Is it possible that they have an interest in exploiting cheap labor throughout the world? And are the conditions that allow for such cheap labor aligned with our American values? Finally, I can't help but react to one more very interesting comment from Donald Trump's Liberation Day speech. He was talking about the country's historical transition away from tariff revenue.
Then in 1913, for reasons unknown to mankind, they established the income tax so that citizens, rather than foreign countries, would start paying the money necessary to run our government.
For reasons unknown to mankind, I'm not so sure. Is it a coincidence that that's the year our corrupted political leaders signed the Federal Reserve Act, handing control of our nation's currency over to a private central bank? Yes, the Federal Reserve, founded in 1913, is a private bank. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. Like all central banks, it is, in my humble opinion, parasitic in nature, meaning it makes its money by leeching value from the population it supports in a very sophisticated and obfuscated fashion. That's why pretty much every population supported by a central bank is in debt. Is it possible that the same powerful bankers who coerced our leaders into signing the Federal Reserve Act also influenced them to institute a federal income tax? Given their parasitic appetite, seems probable to me. My concern is that if Trump doesn't understand this, the best he can do is protect the United States and insist the central banks satisfy their appetites elsewhere. History shows they are not likely to comply, at least not in the long run. A better solution for the world would be to end the central banking system entirely. Now, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. And speaking of dreams, in my last video, I shared my dream of catching a freshwater trout this year. Not much of a dream, I know, it's a pretty common species, but I acquired my fishing skills in San Diego, and there weren't many trout around. Now I'm back in the Northeast, and it's time to get it done. This was prior to opening day for trout, so I had to avoid trout-stocked waters. So I went to this beautiful spot on the mighty Delaware River, and some action ensued. We're gonna have to get him closer. This is dangerous. Oh shit. I hope he's on the camera here. The trout quest will have to continue, but I was pretty happy to catch my first ever walleye. Thanks for watching. Hope your portfolio hasn't taken too much of a hit. If you got some value out of this video, kindly hit that like button. Share your thoughts in the comments. It helps build the Shadow Wreckardz community. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and don't hesitate to share the video if you know someone who might enjoy. See you soon.